Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Collin Stewart, and today I'm joined by Nick Mason. He's the co-founder and CEO over at Turtl, and we're going to be talking product market fit. Before we jump in, this episode's brought to you by our founder coaching program. Founders, let's be real. Scaling a company is tough. You're juggling product, revenue, hiring, vibe coding now probably, and a million other things. But what if you had some folks that had been there and done that before and made the mistakes so you didn't have to? That's our founder coaching program. If that sounds interesting, give us a shout. Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself. Nick, welcome to the show.
Yeah, great to be here, Collin. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you. And good to, I guess, see you again. I feel like we talked back in 2019. I know our companies did some work together a long time ago, probably very different versions of both of our companies. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Turtl and the founding of Turtl, and maybe even before the founding of Turtl, the idea of Turtl. And I've got to ask about the name. So what came first, like the idea, the name?
Well, they came quite close together, actually. The two are quite closely linked. I mean, the idea for the company, as with so many things, was just accidental or serendipitous. I was working with my co-founder at medical sciences at Oxford University, and not as a researcher, because we're not that smart, but supporting them with a software initiative, basically building some software, designing some software. I always say this, but the more letters you have after your name in academia, the later you have to be to meetings, right? So but by the time you've got like 3 or 4 different letters after your name, you've got to be at least 15 minutes late, seems to be the way that this works. And so you spend a lot of time talking to the guys who are actually doing the work, like the PhDs and these guys. And anyway, they were looking at how we read and how the brain processes written information and what causes us to slow down and take it on board and remember it and find it persuasive and all these kinds of things. And so the idea for the business really came from, wouldn't it be interesting if you took all of that good psychology and related it through to business content so that you could deliver better outcomes? And at the time, those outcomes were really around engagement and getting people to relate to the content, but they've evolved, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But that was the original sort of spark behind the company.
Interesting. So you're sitting surrounded by all these folks and just getting a chance to pick their brain. And how do you go from being surrounded by all these PhDs to like, hey, B2B content marketing? Like that's quite the jump.
Yeah, well, I think you sort of learn a few facts, right, around that you didn't know before, and instantly you start to think, where can this be applied? At least that's where my head goes, which is like, where can this little bit of knowledge? And I think so often, like, creations are at the synapse of like 2 different fields, right? I think there's a bit of a study on that, which is that there's nothing new under the sun, and the reality is that innovations come from one world colliding with another, and so the idea really was, where can this good psychology be applied? Myself and my co-founder, we had a little bit of a background between us in B2B marketing. And so the idea was, well, it can be applied here, and the rest is history, as they say.
Cool. And so you have this insight, and then do you immediately jump in and start with Turtl? Do you do any testing, any validating? Like, talk to me about that process.
Yeah. So what really happened is, right, that's an interesting part of the story. So we really started, so my background is engineering. And so we built kind of a few prototypes of, if you were to embody this psychology into a reading format that you could read online, what would it look like? Well, it could look a bit like this, a bit like that. And so we had various different prototypes, and really we just started showing it to mutual contacts, like people that we knew, and said, like, did you know that like your content probably is going to engage people for longer and have more of an impact if it was positioned like this? And we showed it to sort of half a dozen people just to get feedback. And before too long, a couple of people turned around and said, that's quite interesting. Like, how much does it cost? And so that was the point at which we felt like, okay, this is interesting. There could actually be a business in this.
And what was the initial kind of prototype that you showed them? Was this like a service? Was this just like mock-ups? Was it like you had coded up like a janky little thing that kind of worked?
Yeah, kind of the latter. And when I look back now, it's kind of embarrassing, right? You kind of have to start somewhere. But I think that, it's quite useful to have something quite janky and quite, unpolished, because I think that that forces you to really think about the story and about like, what is the value that we're trying to deliver here? And yes, the implementation isn't perfect yet, but if the idea is strong enough, it should carry the current execution, and people should be able to see where this could get to and how that could benefit them. So yeah, definitely a janky prototype was the stage that we were at, but it didn't seem to stop people understanding understanding the value that they could derive from it when it was properly fleshed out and implemented.
Love it. I know we're talking about like 10, 11 years ago, but do you
Yeah.
remember how many people you showed it to before somebody was like, oh, I'd pay for that?
Yeah, quite a few. I think I guess like 15 to 20. This is what's so interesting about like product market fit that people forget, is that there's two parts to it. There's product and there's market. And you can take a brilliant product and show it to the wrong market 50 times and think you're going nowhere. You show it to the first and it just so happens to solve a problem.
I don't want to call you old because you used the term web-based. Also, because I suspect I'm older than you are, but it's just funny when you said that. I was like, wow, I remember, 10, 12 years ago, you were competing against on-prem solutions. You do it yourself, it's in a spreadsheet, or it's just not done. So like web-based was a huge thing back then.
Yeah.
If anybody's listening and wasn't in the startup game 10, 11, 12, 14 years ago.
Yeah. And I still remember, it's funny you mentioned that, but I still remember having to convince a couple of early customers that it was okay to be on the cloud. Like, and that being a serious, like, philosophical question for these businesses. This whole cloud thing is a bit new and scary. Like, do we really want to go there? And that's
What if it rains?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, 10 years is a long time in technology. Hey, a lot of changes.
Yeah. 100%. Now, if you're not on your favorite cloud, like it's
disaster.
Everything's harder. So you explored all these different verticals. You started off publishing, you tried with agencies and you ended up with kind of B2B tech companies. When did your first customer land? And like, how long did you go from like janky prototype interviews and then first dollar of revenue? Do you remember first dollar?
Yeah, I do. And I remember that we were providing the service probably about 6 months before the contract was actually signed, like on a promise, because, it took a little while to get through InfoSec and what have you. So, but that was really good. And I think to answer your question, probably sort of 9 months, like we were really lucky. Like we met a couple of people. Everyone needs a bit of luck, right? We met a couple of people early on who like really believed in what we were saying around the business impact of content and how that could be accentuated. And so a few people kind of went out on a limb to sort of like get this into their business and actually act as kind of ambassadors for us and help us to find other people like them. So if you think about the crossing the chasm, right, you've got the early adopters, I think so we were lucky that we found a couple of those early on, or what we kissed a lot of frogs, right? And we found a couple of early adopters and then they helped us to find others like them because they tend to surround themselves with those people. But yeah, it was a fairly long process. I think about 9 months to get to that first point of revenue from having that first conversation with someone who really kind of saw the potential. But what's good about that is obviously that means you've got 9 months to turn something janky into something slightly less janky. And so that was it. The timeline.
Talk to me about those first couple of people that you found, because I think there's a big difference between like, I think it's innovators at the very beginning and then early adopters and the chasms between. And like, I've heard people complain about not being able to find the innovators. But I think there's innovators everywhere. It's just a matter of like innovators that care about the problem that you're solving. And so what was it that they specifically cared about? Like, obviously you've got this cool thing that you can do with Turtl and this janky prototype. What was the big gap in their life that they're like, man, this sucks. I can't solve X because of Y?
I think it was twofold. I think that they wanted to be able to produce material that was going to be more impactful and like represent their brand better. And they were held back by the fact that, well, if we're going to produce our case studies or our reports or whatever, they're going to be in a PDF and like it's kind of like a bit legacy and what have you. And they much preferred the fact that with us, they could like animate and they could ask questions and they could play video and and that's that point around positioning as a more forward thinking business, just sort of showing people a little bit of a glimpse of the future. But then also off the back of that, it became really important very early on was the tracking aspect of it and the ability to report back on the impact that any particular piece of content could have. And so on the one hand, it was a sort of positioning and how would you say, sort of brand positioning type bit around who we are. And on the other side was being able to report back to the business on what had actually been achieved in slightly more meaningful terms, but also being able to report back for the internal marketing team so that if we're able to say, well, look, this type of content is performing really well in this type of area. And so we can make better content investments. So it's really those two things, which is like positioning ourselves in the way that we want to be seen, and also having the intelligence and the knowledge so that we can double down on what's working and drive more ROI from our marketing spend. Those were sort of the twin the twin concerns that we were talking about early days.
I love that. And I mean, this is like pre LLM days. And so you started off with really large companies, hence the need to go through security and all of that. Why not start off with a smaller company? Is that just the people that hit, or are these the people that had the most pain?
I think potentially they had the most pain, and they were also accessible enough. And they also, what's great about working in retrospect, working with bigger companies who are paying a bit more, is that they kind of, well, in my experience, they really wanted to go on the journey with us. So I think something that they liked is, yeah, they were gonna pay to us like a reasonably substantial amount, but they also then were involved with us around like, it would be great if we could do this and if we could do that. And obviously you've got to be careful. And we did go down a few blind alleys at times. You don't want your roadmap to become a hostage to your customers. And so that's a line to tread that we got wrong once, that I remember quite vividly. But there's value in that as well, because we found, certainly working with those slightly bigger companies that have got a bit more invested in it, that they want to be part of it in a way that I don't know, because we started with big companies, not small ones, that perhaps you wouldn't get with small companies. I'm not sure. We didn't go that route.
I mean, I got two thoughts here. I mean, one, on the big company versus small company, like if you said it's, a third of 8% of the revenue, I mean, that's a pretty significant chunk of revenue. And so if you're selling to $100 million company, they, in theory, have a whole lot more pain than $1 million company from a monetary value perspective.
Yeah.
It also sounds like there was a really interesting story about having your roadmap held hostage. Can you share?
Yeah. So this is one of those ones where you look back and you sort of think, I don't know about you, but I find that I learn best by bumping my head into things, and goodness knows I've done that, right? But this one was great. So we signed a customer who was 5 times, in revenue terms, like for us, 5 times the size of our next largest customer, and so it was a big thing. And like even today, like that would represent for us like a very big deal. And so we signed this quite early. I think they were like our 3rd, 4th customer, something like that. So really big. And basically going into it, they were like, look, we're happy to do this, but we're going to need A, B, C, X, Y, Z. And we looked at it and we thought, okay, that's kind of manageable. But over weeks and months, A, B, C, X, Y, Z grew all sorts of arms and legs. And you're sort of in that position, which is like, this is like, a massive chunk of our revenue. Do we really want to say no to these people? So it's very easy to end up in that situation. I'm sure it's a very common story, but yeah, we definitely made that mistake. And you've really got a choice at that point, I suppose, which is like, you either say no to the revenue, which you need in order to fund things and grow the business, or you kind of get embroiled in all of that. So I don't know exactly what the right answer is, but we definitely found ourselves in a bit of pain there.
I remember having that reminded me of a conversation I had with my CTO back in the day when we were still working on CRM, and the very, very, very large construction company, construction equipment company had approached us about building their CRM, because that's one of the iterations of the terrible CRM that we built, was one specifically for construction reps. And they'd approached us and they wanted us to build basically what we were building, but specifically for them. And we had a very long conversation about, are we a tech company or are we a services company that knows tech? And had we gone and pursued that deal, like they were an order of magnitude bigger, multiple orders of magnitude bigger than any of our other customer, because we only had one and they were only giving us, $1,500 a month. And this would have been like, $100,000 a month kind of deal. So like not something you want to say no to. But on the other hand, like it's going to be a short-term contract. It's going to distract us for a year, and it would have taken us off of the pivot and gotten us to the thing that actually generated real revenue for us. And so, we ended up saying, we said no to the deal fairly early on, because we knew we didn't want to pursue it. And they had all these things that, all these little pieces here, and I need to do A, B, and C. And you're like, those are definitely going to grow legs. Like there's no way.
Yeah. Well, you were smarter than us, I guess.
We were afraid.
We
Not smart. Terrified.
We just didn't know what we were getting ourselves in for. But they were great. Like, they were really good. And we did do the things that we said that we do. And it kind of went okay in the end. But the opportunity cost for a small business, when your roadmap is held hostage, like not held hostage, that sounds so negative, but is sort of prioritized for you, is that's the thing.
Well, you're building something for them as opposed to for everybody. Like when you're building for one, you might miss the greater opportunity, as opposed to like you're building quality of life features for like
Yeah,
one company as opposed to like the thing that's going to be the long-term sustainable business.
exactly that.
Your first customer came from the customer development interviews, and eventually
Yes.
somebody said, "Hey, I need this, I
Yeah.
have this pain." Where did the next couple of customers, was it all from those interviews, or did you?
Well, it was kind of funny because, we got those first few customers. And then as I was saying earlier around like innovators and early adopters, they tend to love technology. And so we found them saying, oh, actually, I know someone over here in this business who would probably like this. And lo and behold, they did quite like this. And that's where it did start to get a kind of quite interesting, because it was actually that sort of second phase of customers that helped us really understand, some of the key integrations that we needed to help to deliver the value that we wanted to. So, I mean, stuff like, great, we've got our own analytics platform, which is quite strong at this point and is kind of getting stronger. But actually, to really show up and help businesses make the right decisions, we also need to be plugging into their Marketo or their HubSpot or their Pardot or whatever else it was that was around at the time. And so it was really that second wave of customers when you start to spot the patterns around, what are we being asked for? And therefore, in order to get to the value that we know that we want to deliver, and therefore, what does that mean for our roadmap? And so that was really interesting. But those introductions, as I say, really came from people sort of kindly seeing our solution, using our solution, buying it, and then wanted to go and talk to their peers about it. So that was a good sort of hesitate to say viral effect, but it was a, what do you say, sort of relationship driven piece.
I'd say it's a sign of product market fit. I mean, the same thing happened to me with Carb. We went 0 to a million in ARR in 3 months, and there was no way that was all from SDRs. It was a source of 10 customers, and then those 10 each referred us to like 2 or 3.
Yeah.
We got to the point where I could guarantee if I closed one customer, they're going to refer at least one more. Like
Yeah.
every customer did, because they're like, oh my
Yeah.
God, we've never been able to do this before. Now we can do this. And to me,
Yeah.
that's the greatest sign of like the strength of your product market fit is when you onboard, when you show it to somebody, when you get a customer onboarded and you make them happy, how willing are
Mm.
they to, go out and make those referrals? And
Yeah.
with Carb, people were forcing referrals on me. Like, hey, talk to my
Mm.
buddy. There's no like double opt-in. They're like, hey, Colin, talk to Carl. Carl needs what
Yeah.
you have. And Carl will be like, here's my credit card. Oh, you don't want to see it?
No.
No, but Nick said it was great. And it sounds like it was kind of the same for you.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was quite that straightforward where people were just lining up to sign checks, but it was definitely the case of people introducing us to people that they knew who had similar problems, and the solution looking like a good fit. So we didn't get from 0 to a million in 3 months. Did you say, or 1 month?
Yeah.
We didn't manage that, but it was good network effect. That's what I meant earlier. It was definitely that feeling.
100%. And for the record, going 0 to a million in 3 months was a bad idea. Everybody on my team told me it was a bad idea, and I did it anyway because I don't listen. And it is what ended up kind of killing that product. Basically, we took our janky prototype that hardly worked, and then we sold it to a bunch of customers. And when your janky thing doesn't work at scale, you go from positive network effects to negative network effects. And so we saw this like beautiful flywheel of deals coming in, and suddenly we went from having like 8 sales calls a day and like 90% of them closed to like nothing, or just kind of started flattening out.
So that's really interesting, right? So that's because you sold to too broad a spectrum and they didn't have like a coherent enough problem, or was it purely down to the fact that the product just wasn't where it needed to be?
Yeah, it was an email sending tool, like a sales loft and outreach, and you would click send, and it was so bogged down that it would take a week to send. And so it 100% my fault, because the CTO and all of our engineers said, don't scale it this fast. We need to build all these things to make sure that it doesn't break at scale, because it won't work. And I said, that's your problem. You'll figure it out. And turns out it was my problem.
But that can go both ways, right? Because I'm reminded of the Steve Jobs story with the glass for the iPhone, right? Do you know this one? Where like he said, look, we need to ship this iPhone and we need to ship like millions of units and blah, blah, blah. And the glass manufacturers came to him and said, look, it can't be done. We can't do it. And he sort of, I imagine in my mind, sort of patted them on the shoulder and was like, you'll work it out. You've got 6 weeks or whatever. And they did. And so, in some cases that can work out. Just unfortunately, in your case, it seems like we didn't quite get there in time. But yeah, that's a shame to see a good flywheel break because of something that in retrospect is so fixable.
100%. My buddy Kareem always likes to give me shit because he says, you nailed the hard part and you fucked up the easy part.
Yeah. That's yeah, man. That's not ideal.
But
Yeah,
I think it's the Jerry Seinfeld quote that brings me kind of solace is it's just the sensation of experience entering the body, and so
absolutely.
that
Absolutely. But
moment.
and I think you have to take that, like to start a business, right? Not everything is going to go your way. And I think you have to treat everything as a learning opportunity. And, what is the world, what is the market telling me about what I have and how valuable it is, and therefore what I need to do next? And I think that if you're not prepared to adopt that, like always learning mindset, it's going to be a very uncomfortable place.
100%. And like I could look back at that experience and be bitter about, oh, I screwed up this opportunity, or I could be grateful for the opportunity to have learned that. And now I
Yeah.
know the feeling of product market fit, deep down in here. And I remember what it was like, and
Mm.
I've used that to help other startups. I've used that to write a book. I've used that to now find product market fit for another startup of mine that'll be, hopefully my full-time thing by the end of this year. And
Yeah.
like, I could be bitter or I could be productive with it.
No, it's all of that stuff. Like every learning like that is a positive. You have to take it that way. It's the only way to be. Otherwise, you're just going to be frustrated continually because nothing ever quite works as the way that you had it planned. And I think you got to be able to like roll with the punches and learn quickly. And actually, I can't remember who it was. It might be Peter Thiel or can't remember who it is now, but basically says that, actually like learning cycle, the speed of your learning cycle is one of the biggest predictors as to, how successful you're going to be.
100%. Uh, so coming back to Turtle, you've got
Yes.
some initial early customers. They're referring you to other customers.
Yeah.
And did that just kind of continue on forever, or did you get to a point where you had to bring in more go-to-market channels?
Yeah, yeah. So we referrals was always like super strong for us, and then we started to grow out the sales team, and we started to do a bit more marketing. I think again, like we made it feels like every mistake that you could make along the way in doing all of those things, but that we still managed to make stuff work. And yeah, we got to the point actually, and I can't remember the exact dates when this was, when we were doing like really, really good deals with like blue chip companies, like really, really big names. And yeah, in retrospect, it's kind of amazing how quickly I think we got to that point. And so yeah, we just kind of we grew in that way. And then, the thing that was really interesting, which is sort of more informing, the focus that we have at the moment is the pressure that was placed on marketing, certainly over the last 3 or 4 years to be more commercially accountable. And so at this point, we started to find, sales are harder, sales cycles are longer, win rates are under pressure because you've got CFOs and procurement teams saying, yeah, that's great. Like this all looks really good, but is it revenue up? Is it cost down? Which is it? And how are you going to quantify that? And, in retrospect, again, we just didn't have, our story totally buttoned up on that. And so this is where we, again, if you think about product market fit and, there's two components to it, the market moved in the marketing world. So, I guess a couple of years ago, we sort of realized that with our product to get to the place where we were able to move in the direction that we wanted, we needed to really align again to what the market needed, which is that commercial proof. So the ability to show, if I'm spending all this money on content, to show exactly which deals are we moving, exactly which ones are being closed won, and so on and so forth. And so that's where we've really diverted our focus in the last couple of years, which has been again like an interesting journey and continually trying to refine and optimize that product market fit.
I love that. I mean, it resonates so strongly that, the kind of what you're saying is, and I'm rephrasing maybe in my own words from the book, but the product market fit isn't binary. It is not like a light switch you flip on once and you have it forever. It kind of exists on a bit of a spectrum from weak to
Yes.
strong, and that can vary. And that can vary.
Yeah.
It can change when the market changes. It's this like constantly updating mathematical
Yeah.
formula or spreadsheet.
Exactly. And the thing that I found really useful more recently, and it's funny enough, someone was asking me yesterday where this framework came from, and I still can't work out where, but a model so product market fit, I always found really frustrating because, people write posts about it and they do all this stuff, but they never really defined it in a way that I felt useful. And my least favorite one was always, you'll know it when you've got it. And it's like, oh, well, that's
Mhm.
really helpful, isn't it? It's like, I'll just keep waiting until I feel like I've got it.
True, in a way, like
It is true.
having felt it, but it's not helpful at all to share that.
Exactly. It's true, but it's not useful. But the bit that I found really helpful, which I would definitely use again going forwards, is to break it down into 3 bits, which is problem market fit, solution market fit, and value market fit. I find this helpful. And what that means, problem market fit, is basically, do we see that the problem that we're talking about, the issue that we're looking to solve, is a big enough fire for our market, for people that, because if it's not on your top three, it's not getting funded. And so, the problem that you're going out into the world to solve, it better be on that top three. Otherwise, you need to find a different problem, or you need to find a different market, right? So that's problem market fit. Solution market fit then is when we show people what we do, and when we take them through a sales process or a buying journey, whatever, does our solution naturally emerge as the obvious default way to fix this, like the obvious preferred one? And so that comes down to how we articulate value, the actual tangible product that we have, and the various different pieces that go into making that happen. And the sales process, what steps do we take people through? How do we build ROI? How do we talk about it? How do we make it CFO proof and all of that kind of stuff? So that's solution market fit. And then value market fit is around, okay, but when someone actually gets it into their hands and they're using it, do they see the value repeatably and reliably enough and measurably enough such that they like big tick? Because that then creates the proof points that allow you to go back to the start and evangelize the problem in the market again and the solution. And so for me, that's a really helpful model that I like around, breaking down product market fit into something that's a bit more understandable and workable, so that you can learn quickly as a group and try and, make improvements where they're needed, rather than just scratch your head about how do we improve product market fit, which I've always found a little challenging.
I've got very similar but slightly different thoughts on it that I don't think we need to kind of split hairs here, but I love the idea. I definitely think that there was especially with all the product market fit, the like innovator's dilemma, the, lean startup, all of the Steve Blank stuff was like phenomenal. And then they go, now go get out of the building. And you're like, well, what does that mean? They're like, oh, go sell some stuff. It's like, but is it really go sell some stuff? Like there's gradients to like what you really need to do. And I think maybe in the 90s or early 2000s, like if you had a piece of software and it solved kind of the problem, then it was a lot easier because there was so much less software out there. But I think fast forward to today, you need to be a lot more specific and a lot more fine-tuned. And it does seem like that's the direction that everything is going, is everything's going to be a whole lot more purpose fit for a specific, niche in the industry. We talked about where the first customers came from, where the next customers came from. I want to tell me about the moment you realized I've got something here. Like I feel like I have strong product market fit.
I think going back to the point around when, I don't know, like we're saying, it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum, and like how strong is strong. I think the point that I really remember was when revenue grew. It was sort of effortless. It was sort of effortless, and it was like almost whatever we tried, whether we said, well, look, we're going to do a webinar, or we're going to go to an event, or we're going to go to whatever. It all just seemed to deliver like really good results, across the board. And so that for me is the bit that I really remember. And you kind of feel almost like you kind of can't put a foot wrong. It's like whatever I'm doing here just seems to be working. But what I'll say is that, weirdly, in retrospect, the period where we had that really strong sort of pull from the market, I feel like I learned relatively little. And actually, I learned the most at times where it was less certain, and times, particularly as I say recently, this is going back a couple of years, where the market moves from being over here to being over here, and you've got to work out how you want to relate to it again. That I think, going back to what we were saying before about mindset and attitude, that's the place where you really learn a lot, and you kind of really get better at what you're doing, rather than when, it's like the saying, anyone can sail on calm seas. It's when markets move that it's when, you really have the opportunity to learn, I think.
100%. I think I've learned so much more from the things I've screwed up than from the times when things were going really well.
100%. We have that in common for sure. And I'm sure there's still plenty more mistakes for me to make. I feel like I've made my fair share. Yeah.
Love it. I'm curious, what comes next for Turtl?
So I think this problem that we're solving now is really exciting, because as we said before, the amount of money that is being spent in this particular area is astronomical. And it's kind of amazing to me in almost all cases how poorly understood the ROI is. And so for me, like this ability to really help businesses understand what commercial outcome their content is driving and what they need to do to accentuate and improve that and get better ROI in future, remains like a super exciting problem with tons of stuff to explore. Like, I feel like we're just scratching the surface in terms of what can be done there. And when you factor in, some of the opportunities that we spoke about with AI and, delivering that value in an agentic way, I just think there's a ton to go after. I'm sure you're right. Like, the AI piece will probably move quicker than we expect, or will it? I don't know. But I think that there's tons to get stuck into there. And it's also very much a topical thing. Like any sort of marketing conference or industry event, or even on LinkedIn, talks, not exclusively, but a lot about, the commercial imperatives being placed on marketing now. And I think that if we can help marketers square that circle and solve that problem, that's an exciting place to be operating.
I love it. I have one question left, but before I ask my last question, where did the name Turtl come from?
So yes, you asked it at the start and we never quite answered that. So when we were chatting to all those brainy PhDs all those years ago, they were explaining like the way that we read a magazine is that we don't read it like a book. We don't start with the first word of the first page of the first chapter and read sequentially. We flick through quite quickly. And then a visual stimulus, or something which typically is visual, catches our attention, right? Because it's something that we're interested in, or something that we don't like, or something that we do like. And then we slow down and we read. And so your brain is operating in those two ways, like quick, like skimming. And then when we find something that's relevant, we like zone in and we go and we read it. And weirdly at the time, I don't know where, probably in a magazine, but I think it was my co-founder was reading about turtles and the as you do, like the habits of turtles. And it turns out that some turtles swim super quick across the surface of the ocean. From memory, it's like 25 kilometers an hour or something. I think that's right. They go really quickly. But then equally, they will slow down when they find, searchers think it's food, but they're not 100% sure. And they will go down like super far, like hundreds of meters to the bottom of the ocean, we think, to feed. And in doing so, they will slow their heart rate down to, I think it's 1 beat every 8 minutes, because if they didn't do that, the pressure would cause them to explode, which isn't good for anyone. So it seemed to us there was a parallel between how turtles operate, where they go really quick and then slow and deep, and how we read, which is that we go really quick, grabs our attention, then we go slow and deep. So I figured this is what we should call the company. It's fate. We should name it Turtl.
I love it so much. What comes next for Turtl?
What comes next? World domination, obviously. No, like closing the revenue gap. I haven't mentioned that at all, by the way, and I really should have done. And the revenue gap is that piece that I said before, which is like, reconciling the cost, the input, the economic spend that goes into producing all of this content, and the tangible, quantifiable business outcome there. So what's next for us is helping everyone shut that gap so that they can prove and improve the ROI of all that money that they spend on content.
If people are curious about Turtl and they want to learn more, or they want to learn more about you, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
So we have a website, turtl.co, which is TURTL, no E-C-O, or you can grab me on LinkedIn. I think my LinkedIn profile is Nick Mason Says. I'm pretty sure that's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, great. There you go. So those are the best ways to get in touch. Yeah, for sure.
Right on. Nick, pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great speaking. Thanks, Collin.
You got it. And thanks to everybody for listening. We'll catch you all next time.